Two cars crashed into each other with a force that seemed impossible for a city that was used to moving. The metal twisted. The glass broke. And in a matter of seconds, 2 lives were lost, leaving behind questions that would haunt everyone who knew them. The news about the crash spread faster than the ambulances. In the Bell universe, tragedy never stays where it belongs. It spills over into living rooms, hospital hallways, and corporate boardrooms. By midnight, people were already talking about who was involved, what really happened, and if this was really an accident at all. Daniel Hartman was one of the victims. His name meant something in Los Angeles business circles. Daniel made his money in real estate and by being quiet and powerful. He was the kind of person who never raised his voice but always got what he wanted. He was known to the public as a family man and a philanthropist. People who knew him well said he was complicated. He could be loyal, but he could also be cruel if you crossed him. His death shocked a lot of people who relied on him, were afraid of him, or owed him favors they hoped he would never ask for. Elena Cruz, a young investigative journalist whose career was just starting to take off, was the second victim. Elena believed in truth like other people believe in God. She chased stories that other people were too scared to touch, and she had been working on something big that made her so nervous that she had to look over her shoulder. The next morning, when her name showed up in the police report, more than one powerful person felt a chill that had nothing to do with grief. The emergency room at Memorial Hospital was full of the same old chaos. Doctors and nurses acted on instinct, but there was nothing they could do. The time of death had already been set at the scene. The sterile hallways didn't help the families who got there hours later. In soap operas, hospitals are places where people break up, and this night was no different. Margaret Hartman, Daniel's wife, stood still as the words were spoken to her. She had spent years learning how to control her home, her public image, and her husband's secrets. That moment she lost control. She cried not only for the man she had loved, but also for the life she now knew she had never fully understood. Daniel had been driving in a part of town he didn't go to very often. By yourself. At night. The questions started to come up even before the sadness had gone away. Mateo Cruz, Elena's younger brother, reacted very differently in other parts of the city. First came anger. Mateo had told Elena that her most recent investigation was risky. She smiled and told him that truth was more important than fear. Mateo promised that her death would not be just a headline or a traffic statistic as he stood outside the morgue. He thought that someone knew more than they were letting on. The Los Angeles Police Department quickly called the event a tragic accident, but in a Bell-style story, that's just the beginning of the official explanations. The cameras that were watching over things had broken. Witnesses gave different accounts. One person said the light had been green. Another person said that both cars had gone through the intersection too quickly. And then there was the phone call Elena had made just before the crash that ended suddenly and was never finished. As time went on, the tragedy began to show cracks in relationships that had seemed strong. Margaret Hartman found out that Daniel had recently taken a lot of money out of one of their joint accounts. When she showed him bank statements, his longtime lawyer gave her vague answers that only made her more suspicious. For years, Margaret had defended Daniel against critics. Now she was unsure if she had been keeping him safe from truths she didn't want to face. At the same time, Elena's newspaper editor was having a hard time with guilt. Even when she was worried about her safety, he told her to keep going with the story. In the Bell tradition, professional ambition often gets in the way of personal responsibility, and this was no different. The editor quietly locked Elena's unfinished files in his office because he didn't know if telling the truth would honor her memory or put other people in danger. The city watched as the tragedy happened in slow motion. At the crash site, candlelight vigils appeared. The flickering flames of the candles were reflected in the bent metal that still bore scars from the crash. People who didn't know each other left flowers. Reporters made guesses. People on social media were buzzing with ideas. Los Angeles had seen tragedy before, but this one felt different, like the beginning of a story that wasn't over yet. Like in a classic soap opera, the accident started to bring together people who normally wouldn't be around each other. Mateo Cruz and Margaret Hartman met at the memorial site. Their shared grief made them feel close, but it was a bond based on pain, not trust. They both thought that the other person knew something they weren't saying. In the Bell universe, alliances that were made in grief often had hidden goals. Flashbacks showed what Daniel Hartman did in his last hours. He had a fight with someone on the phone, and his voice was tense and his composure was breaking. He had driven too fast not because he was careless but because he needed to. Elena Cruz, on the other hand, had been going over papers in her car and practicing the question she was going to ask a source who never showed up. Something dark or fate put them on the same road at the same time. As the weeks went by, the accident's effects grew. Without Daniel's steady hand, his business empire started to fall apart. Board members circled like sharks, and Margaret had to take on a role she had never wanted to. Every choice she made brought her closer to the truths Daniel had kept from her. Every new piece of information made her wonder if loving him had cost her more than she thought. Mateo, who didn't believe the official story, started to follow Elena's steps again. He found encrypted emails, anonymous tips, and a connection that made him shiver. Elena had been looking into a land deal that was directly linked to Hartman Enterprises. The crash that killed both of them didn't seem like a coincidence anymore. Secrets never stay hidden for long in the Bell family. Eventually, a witness came forward, unable to sleep and full of guilt. That night, she saw a third car near the intersection, but it left before the police got there. Her testimony brought the investigation back to life, giving some people hope and others fear. Margaret had to make an impossible choice: protect her husband's legacy or tell the truth that could ruin it. Mateo was at a crossroads. He could either fight for justice no matter what or give up for the sake of his family's peace. Their stories were connected by loss, love, and the unending pull of truth. Los Angeles stopped acting like the accident was just an accident by the time spring turned into summer. It had turned into a mirror that showed the city's contradictions: power and weakness, ambition and consequence. In the true Bell style, the tragedy was not the end, but the beginning of something that changed lives in ways no one could have predicted. The last time the camera pulled back from the memorial site, it was clear. In a city built on change, some moments change everything, and no one is left untouched. There were no flashing lights or dramatic press conferences when the investigation was reopened. It came in quietly, like a feeling of unease settling into the city's bones. Detectives went back to the intersection at dusk to measure the skid marks that were already starting to fade, and talked to shop owners who were sure they hadn't seen anything strange. In the world of soap operas, truth doesn't come out and say itself. It waits for people to notice it. Margaret Hartman could feel the change right away. Calls from Daniel's old co-workers that used to come every day slowed down and then stopped completely. The invitations were taken back. Smiles became weak. She saw the pattern. People pulling away from her before the scandal could affect them. Grief turned into determination. She needed to know why Daniel's name was going to be dragged through the mud, and if he deserved it. Margaret unlocked Daniel's private study for the first time since the funeral late one night when she couldn't sleep. The smell of his cologne was still in the room. Everything was perfect, too perfect. Daniel had been very careful but not too careful. At that point she saw the drawer that didn't quite close. There were property maps, shell company registrations, and a handwritten note with the words, "If this gets out, everything falls apart," underlined twice. She had never seen these things before. Mateo Cruz was also having trouble sleeping at night. Elena's apartment had turned into a shrine, with parts of it serving as a memorial and parts as a crime scene. He sat on the floor with her notebooks around him, putting together bits and pieces of her last weeks. Names kept coming up. Dates are circled in red. A warehouse near the port that Hartman Enterprises owned indirectly came up over and over again. Mateo's anger was so strong that it took his breath away. Elena had met Daniel Hartman before. She had been going around him. When Mateo tried to tell the police what he had found, they politely told him no. How things work. Jurisdiction. No proof. He had seen this before. The truth was slowed down by red tape until it lost its speed. He made a choice that night that would change everything. He would find another way if the system didn't work. In the meantime, Margaret asked Daniel's lawyer, a man who had known her husband longer than she had, for answers. Their meeting seemed friendly at first, but every word had meaning. The lawyer paused for just long enough to give himself away when she asked him directly if Daniel had been under investigation before he died. Margaret left the office knowing two things for sure. Daniel had secrets and people were willing to keep them safe, even now. The case became more and more interesting to the city. News segments showed video of the crash site again. Commentators talked about different theories. Was it a sad coincidence? A secret? Viewers chose sides like soap opera fans always do, siding with characters whose pain they could relate to. Grief had turned into a show, and no one could get away from it. A break came out of nowhere from the person who had seen the third car. She admitted that she hadn't come forward sooner because she knew the car. A private security company owned it, and they often worked for famous people. People like Daniel Hartman. The implication was very strong. The story changed a lot if a Hartman-linked car had been close to the scene. A reporter told Margaret about this new development while she was outside a charity gala she had to go to. People shouted questions and cameras flashed. Did Daniel do something against the law? Did she know more than she let on? Margaret kept her cool until she got to her car. Then she lost it when she realized she might never fully know the man she married. Matteo followed his own leads to find one of Elena's secret sources. This man was so scared that he turned down a meeting twice before finally agreeing. At dawn, they met in an empty parking lot, where there was a lot of tension between them. The source said that Elena had found proof that safety inspections were not done correctly in connection with the redevelopment project. It would have cost powerful people millions to let it out. She had planned to publish in a few days. Matteo felt the weight of it on his shoulders. Elena didn't die while trying to get a story. The story was dangerous and she died because of it. As the pressure grew, Hartman Enterprises started to break down. People who spoke out came forward. Journalists got their hands on anonymous leaks. Margaret saw the empire that Daniel built fall apart piece by piece. Every new piece of information made her rethink her sadness. Could she be sad about a man who may have caused someone else's death? Like in a real soap opera, loyalties got mixed up. At first, Margaret contacted Matteo out of guilt, but later she did it out of need. Their talks were tense, honest, and raw in ways that neither of them expected. Two people who had been through terrible things came together to find the truth, no matter how painful it was. There were no sirens at the climax. Instead, there was a confession. A former Hartman security contractor, who was being charged with something else, agreed to talk. He said that Daniel had a lot of stress the night of the accident, because he was threatened with exposure if he didn't meet someone right away. That meeting never took place. The crash got in the way. Was it supposed to? When the truth finally came out, it was messier than anyone thought it would be. Daniel didn't mean to hurt anyone, but the choices he made set off a chain of events that got out of hand. Elena was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but only because she was brave enough to look where other people wouldn't. The official decision was changed. Not paying attention. Things that help. No clear bad guys, no clear ending. Just loss. Los Angeles moved on, as cities always do after something bad happens. Old stories were replaced by new ones. But for the people in the middle, nothing was the same. Margaret left the company, choosing to be anonymous instead of having power. Matteo made sure that Elena's work was published after her death, keeping her byline and finally letting her voice be heard. And somewhere between justice and grief, the city learned a lesson that is common in soap operas. The truth always comes out, but it never comes without a price. The city acted like the story was over after the new ruling was made public. The news moved on. It was replaced by other tragedies. But for those whose lives had been ripped apart, the real story was just starting. In soap operas, there is no real resolution. The effects last forever. Every morning, Margaret Hartman woke up to a silence she had never heard before. The mansion that used to be full of staff, meetings, and Daniel's strict authority now felt empty. The rooms echoed. Portraits looked at her like they were accusing her. She kept going over memories with fresh eyes. Daniel's late nights, his vague answers, and the way he always seemed to be getting ready for something. She realized too late that love had made her blind to warning signs she had chosen not to see. One afternoon, while going through boxes that Daniel had kept in storage, Margaret found something that made her hands shake. A burner phone. Still worked. The last call had been made the night before the accident. Margaret didn't save the number, but she knew right away that this was a door she couldn't avoid opening any longer. When she called the voicemail, a man's voice, calm, practiced, and dangerous, answered. He didn't give his name. He didn't have to. The short but terrible message he left said, "You were warned. Now we all have to pay the price." Margaret hung up and sat in shock. Daniel wasn't just feeling the heat. He was stuck. At the same time, Mateo Cruz was dealing with a different kind of emptiness. Elena's investigation brought her public praise, awards, and anger, but none of it filled the void she left behind. He saw people he didn't know praise her bravery while he felt bad for not stopping her. In the Belle universe, heroes always get hurt. Mateo started to see things he hadn't seen before. A car that sat still for too long near his apartment. A man who seemed to show up at the same coffee shop on different days and at different times. He told himself it was paranoia until he saw an envelope taped to his door. There was only one picture inside. Elena meeting with someone whose face had been carefully hidden. The picture was taken weeks before she died. The 3 words on the back sent a chill through him. She knew enough.